we are Legally Sis. Welcome to our podcast.
The information provided in the show is for general informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice on any subject matter. No attorney-client relationship is created between you and Duran Schultz Law.
Hi! Welcome to Legally Sis. I'm Attorney Wen.
And I'm Attorney March. Welcome to our podcast. In this episode, we will be discussing about visa. Well, particularly working visa.
That's a great topic. I'm sure there are a lot of people who will be interested in learning about visas in the Philippines.
Yes. There are a lot of different types of visas in the country. You have retirement visa, you have spouse visa, and the most common would be the working visa. But because the topics are wide and varied, for this episode, we will be centering on just the working visa and how to get it.
Alright, so for purposes of discussions, what is a visa?
Visa is a document that allows a foreigner to stay in a country for a specific purpose.
So, what is the type of visa in the Philippines if a foreigner would like to work here?
Okay, that would be called 9G visa.
And what will be the requirements for acquiring a 9G visa?
Before we discuss the 9G visa, we should first talk about the other government agency that is required to get a 9G visa. So in any working visa, you have to go through the Department of Labor and Employment, or the DOLE. The DOLE will give you an alien employment permit, and this alien employment permit is needed before you can proceed with the 9G visa. So under the Department of Labor and Employment, there is what you call an Alien Employment Permit, or AEP. The AEP, through the Department of Labor, would want to know the labor market test, meaning are there any other Filipinos that cannot or that can do the job of a foreigner? Because as much as possible, any vacancy in the Philippines should be given to Filipino workers.
So you mean to say that AAP is not automatically granted if, say, an employer or a company would want a foreigner who would want to work in the Philippines?
Yes, that's correct. Actually, a material requirement in getting an AEP is publication. So if you are an employee that would have, this would be your first time application for that specific company and specific position, your position will first have to be published in a newspaper of general in circulation. And if there are any objections, or if there are any other Filipinos that would want to apply for that particular position and that Filipino is qualified, then you will need to give that position first to the Filipino before to the foreigner.
Okay. Is there any percentage of a particular foreign employees that an employer may employ?
Not really if it's a regular company, non-PESA. So if it's a regular company, there is no percentage or minimum requirement or maximum number of Philippine foreigners that needs to be employed or can be employed by a domestic entity in the Philippines. But do note that part of the requirements would be the sponsoring company or the employer should have sufficient capital. This is about 10 million pesos paid in that your sponsoring company would have to have before it can eligibly file or sponsor a foreigner working for you.
Alright, so you mean to say that there must be a 10 million capital on the part of the employer before he or she can invite a foreigner to work for his company? So what if a foreigner wants to work here but he doesn't have any sponsoring company? What can he do with that instance?
There are instances, especially for those that are very technical jobs, that Philippine entities would contract foreign entities that are specializing in a particular industry to work on a certain project. For example, you have in renewable energy, right? You are a power company here in the Philippines and you subcontracted foreign company to do a particular work in, say, construction of that renewable energy. Since the Philippine entity has already contracted the foreign entity, the employer of the foreigner that would be working in the Philippines would be the foreign entity. And there would be difficulty for that foreigner being sent by the foreign country to work in the Philippines because the foreign company does not have the requirements to lodge the alien employment permit and the 9G visa. So there are two ways. One would be you ask the Philippine entity that would want you to be part of their team for a short period of time to sponsor you for that 9G visa. Or your foreign entity would find an employer of record in the Philippines to sponsor you as a subcontractor to work for that energy company in the Philippines. So you're looking at three companies already involved. One is the Philippine entity wanting the foreign entity's work, and then the foreign entity having a memorandum of agreement with an employment of record company here, so that that company EOR will be able to um, sponsor the foreigner to work in the Philippines.
All right. That's good to know.
Going back to the requirements of having an alien employment permit, you have to have a sponsoring company that is registered in the Philippines. It can be a foreign entity, but this foreign entity should have a license to do business in the Philippines, or it can be a domestic entity, or it can even be a DTI, so long as it's registered to do business in the country. There are other requirements such as business permit. If you are a corporation, general information sheet. You also have to have an audited financial statement, and you also have to be registered with the Department of Labor because recently the alien employment permit application would now have to be uploaded via the internet. So if your company is not registered with Dole, then you won't have your registration and you won't be able to upload the documents.
Okay, so apart from the DOLE or apart from the DOLE, what are the other agencies that is involved in securing a foreign work permit?
After securing the alien employment permit ID, then you will turn over a lot of documents with the Bureau of Immigration. This is another step, and there are another set of requirements that you have to compile before you can successfully get an IG visa.
Okay, so after the DOLE processing, so the employer, is it the employer or the employee, the foreign employee himself who will go to the Bureau of Immigration?
Okay. In both circumstances, your application with the Department of Labor and with the Bureau of Immigration, it is actually recommended that you are registered or an accredited employer with the Department of Labor and Employment, and you work with an accredited law firm or agency to be able to file your application. For the Bureau of Immigration, it's not really necessary, except that it just makes it easier for you to navigate with your application, because upon payment, it doesn't stop there. You need to follow up, and it's a difficulty to enter the premises if you're not accredited. Going back to your question on is it necessary to go to appear before the government agency, for the Department of Labor and Employment to secure the AEP, it's not necessary for you to be present at their office, at the Dole office. However, you have to be here in the Philippines because they would want to see your passport or your entry stamp. With the Bureau of Immigration, you have to be in the Philippines, but you may be interviewed. So it is necessary that you will go to the Bureau of Immigration. Also, your biometrics will be needed. They'll take a picture, they'll take your fingerprint. So once it's approved, you really have to be there.
So how long does it take for these government agencies to approve a work visa?
At the Department of Labor and Employment, you have to give yourself 6 to 8 weeks before it's finished or before you can get your alien employment permit. At the Bureau of Immigration, it will take you roughly 3 to 4 months.
Wow, that's long.
Yes, you should be prepared to work throughout the process for about 6 months.
So going back a while ago to the discussion that you mentioned that the foreigner must be here in the Philippines while he or his employer is processing his work permit. So is there a possibility that the foreigner is still outside in the Philippines and the employer will work throughout his employment visa?
Very good question, because you can't stay in the Philippines all throughout, right? While you're processing for your 9G visa. So you can be in the Philippines when you lodge your application for your alien employment permit. You can leave, and then once you get your alien employment permit ID and your processor is ready to file for your 9G visa, then you can be back in the Philippines to lodge your 9G visa application. And then once it's pending, you can leave again, but make sure to be here or be back before the 9G visa has been approved by the Bureau of Immigration. You also have to understand that you can not work in the Philippines unless you have a working visa. But there is an exception to that. For example, you have PWP or Provisional Work Permit. Because it takes quite some time before you get your 9G visa at the Bureau of Immigration, once you lodge your 9G visa, talk to your processor, because it is possible for you to also lodge at the same time a Provisional Work Permit application. So there will be two applications pending. That would be PWP and then the 9G. So that once the PWP has been approved, usually it takes about 2 to 3 weeks. And then you don't have to wait for the 3 to 4 months before the 9G has been approved before you can start working.
Okay, that's good to know.
Let's talk about bottlenecks. Why does it take so long? Sometimes it can even take longer than 6 months. So what are the documents that you need to prepare aside from those that you can find in your checklist before, just to make sure that the process is smooth? For the Department of Labor and Employment, the usual issue that I've seen would be the audited financial statement of the company. For example, you want to start in January, and your company's audited financial statement is just being processed by your auditor because it's January. The deadline is usually, yeah. So at that time, usually it's not available. So it's going to be difficult for you to present the current audited financial statement with the government agency during that period. So unfortunately, it's not good to time your application during the first quarter because you have unavailable documents. Also, for your business permit, your mayor's permit will no longer be current if you would have applied by February or March, because your business permit application usually is lodged around January. The deadline is January 20. And if you have issues with your business permit, there are instances that your business permit certificate will only be released maybe March. So if your business permit is released only that time, then that means your 9G alien employment permit visa will be pending because you don't have all the requirements. Another one would be your registration with the Department of Labor and Employment, because a lot of companies, for the first time filers, are not registered with the Department of Labor. So if you are looking at hiring a foreigner, you should already consider registering with the Department of Labor. Everything is online now. You have to upload your documents online before you can even pay, and before the lodging of the application with the Department of Labor can proceed. Another one would be your tax identification number. So sometimes they would say it's a chicken egg. You still are not allowed to work, but you're asked to provide a tax identification number, right? But there is a way, like you have job offer or employment contract, but the start date for that job offer will only start maybe 60 days from the time you got your offer. So you can present that offer to the Bureau of Internal Revenue so that you can get a tax identification number for the foreigner. That TIN or tax identification number is needed in the requirements. As part of the requirements, you need to indicate that in the form with the alien employment permit. For the Bureau of Immigration, it's usually smooth flowing right after the securing of the AEP ID. So you can be sure that you won't be facing any hurdles once you have all the requirements. On the lookout on the checklist found at the immigration website, because there are a lot of documents that needs to be provided there.
So after the AEP has been issued and you're already cleared with the Bureau of Immigration, what's the term of the work permit being issued?
Oh my God. Okay. For first time application, you'll only be given 1 year visa. So that is actually the issue, because it will take you around 5 to 6 months before you have completed the process. And the reckoning point of your 1 year visa would be the start of your employment stated in your employment contract. And that would mean you have lost already 5 to 6 months in your employment contract. And once your 9G visa has been stamped on your passport. So you're looking at like maybe 7 to 8 months remaining in the visa once it's stamped in your passport before you're going to have a renewal of your 9G visa.
So you mentioned that you are eligible to have your AEP renewed, right?
Yes.
So what's the term for the renewed one?
Okay, you can renew it for another year or 2 years, maximum of 3 years. So once you have your 1 year visa, before it expires, you have to start working on the renewal already. But there is a caveat. Your position, your company would have to be the same. Because, for example, you've been promoted, your employment designation has changed, then you repeat the process all over again. Because your visa would have to be downgraded and then reapply. So your fresh start of 1 year would have to begin all over again. So the trick is, unfortunately, while you know that you can be promoted during that period, say you really did a very good job, for visa purposes, it's suggested that your job position or job title will remain the same so that you can work, you can ask for renewal for another year or 2 years with the Department of Labor and Employment and the Bureau of Immigration.
Wow, those are a lot of information.
Correct. You should also consider the fees that you need to pay. So for first time applications at the Department of Labor and Employment, it would be at the minimum of 10,000 pesos. And then every time you ask for a renewal, you pay 5,000 pesos. The fees with the Bureau of Immigration also depends on the number of years you ask. So it depends on if you ask for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. I would have to recommend that when you are applying for your visa, because I'm assuming your visa status then, before application would have been tourist visa, you have to ensure that you have a long tourist visa validity, because that is also a bottleneck. Like they can't process your application if you have an expired visa. So at least 30 days, but generally I would say, you already have 60 days of validity. Otherwise, in the middle of the application, you have to renew your visa again, your tourist visa. And it can, every week that you have to process these things count and can cause a delay or lengthen your process in the application of your 9G visa. After your 9G visa has been approved, it will be posted at the website of the Bureau of Immigration. But that doesn't stop there, because do not forget that your visa has to be stamped on your passport. And then after that, you should be expecting for an ACR an alien certificate of registration, particularly for working visa. This will add another maybe 2 to 3 weeks to your application. And during that time, you really can't leave the country because you have a pending application or stamping and ACR pending with the Bureau of Immigration.
It's a lot of process to take.
Yes, and it can be really frustrating for those foreigners that are working in the APAC region, meaning the foreigners are just not really taking care of the Philippine market, but markets that are, for example, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and it's really a requirement for them to travel most of the time. And if they are traveling and your visa in the Philippines has been approved, it would pose difficulty for you to have your visa stamped or processed because there is what you call a revalidation. For example, your visa has been approved while you're outside of the country. There is an extra step. This is called the revalidation, and you have to send a letter to the immigration saying that you are still intent or you still wish to continue the 9G visa. You can explain it to the Bureau of Immigration. The Bureau of Immigration is very understanding of the situation, but just don't make it a habit of flying back and forth without completing your 9G visa stamping in your passport and getting your ACR, because it can be a nightmare. It can cause trouble for you. That would add about 2 to 3 weeks of your visa processing also in the whole 5 to 6 months that you're looking at. It's fun.
Fun working in the Philippines.
Well, that is the reason why I would recommend that you get a lawyer or a firm or those that are accredited with both the Department of Labor and Employment and the Bureau of Immigration to process your visa, especially if you're really in a time crunch. You really want to get your 9G visa as soon as possible, because any mistake will count towards the delay of the processing of your visa.
Right.
Thank you for listening. Bye!